get that off my face right away. There we go. Everybody, Jeff Colson, Mike Bloom. We're talking junior hockey on a Wednesday afternoon, evening. I'm glad to see everybody here, everybody that's popping on. Groups jumping really quick. I'd like to see that. Hey, we're going to kind of take a – first of all, hi, Mike.
Hey, Jeff. I'm glad you noticed I was here.
I'm glad you're here. I really am. I'm glad that I'm glad you're here. That's all I got to say. We used all of our good material on the first show of the season the other night, and now I got nothing to say. It's like, all right, everybody, good night.
I know. We definitely have some pretty funny banter that sometimes does, show up on the podcast, but a lot of our best material somehow ends up just in our normal conversation. So we're depriving the audience.
The floor of the editing room. That's what they say in the business.
I know.
The floor of the editing room. All right, listen, tonight we're going to talk about the process. We're going to talk a little bit about behind the scenes. We're going to use our examples of what we do a little bit to kind of give you a sense of what the scouting process is behind in the junior world, what the planning is, kind of what we're doing. And kind of this is because Mike and I have a call with the scouts right after this. So we're going to kind of put our plan together right now for what we're going to say when we talk to the scouting staff on our call, Zoom call after this. So you guys are going to help us plan our evening activities right now. Sorry. So if you want to say hi, please jump in. Please. Oh, listen. Oh, right off the bat, somebody jumping in hard. Greg's jumping in hard on you. Take the Lions.
One of our scouts.
Well, it used to be a thing where the Lions were like the Cubs, and it was fun. It was fun to be a Lions fan because you knew we were hopeless. You knew we really didn't have a shot of doing anything. We had our days. We had our Barry Sanders for a long time, and that was really fun. And we had once in a while a good player, but we had
Calvin Johnson.
What's that?
Yeah, Calvin Johnson, Matt Stafford. Yep. Those were some good years, even though we didn't do anything.
But we never got anywhere, and that was the fun of it. Is like being a Cubs fan. You just knew for years as a Cubs fan, hey, we might win a few games and we'll get a little excited, but it just never went anywhere, and that was fun. Now that they're getting to be consistently good, it's a little different,
Well, I wouldn't say consistently. They still have yet to do anything, but the hype is there because they should be a good team moving forward.
Well, the difference I see, and I know we're not a football show, so what the difference I see in this though is the difference I see is they're kind of built from the ground up now. They've got a staff and they've got an ownership that might be still the same ownership people, but it just seems like they've rejuvenated and kind of built from that side of it versus before. Hey, we had Cocaine Wayne. We had Wayne Fonts. Who's going to give a team to Wayne Fonts and expect anybody to win a game? That's the kind of way they went for years. Is they just kind of bounced off the walls and, hey, we need a new coach. Okay, get the want ads out. All right, there's a guy. That I just never got it. But
by the way, my fantasy football's team name is Cocaine Wayne.
Is it really?
And it's a picture of him getting hoisted up by his players.
Oh my goodness. Okay. We're not going to stay on this all night, but you got to answer this question.
Yeah, I live in Chicago, but I was born in Detroit. And lived there up until high school and then came over to Chicago. So all of my allegiance is still to my roots in Detroit. I haven't picked up any of I'll still support the Cubs. Obviously, there's no rivalry there. I had season tickets for the Cubs for probably, 4 or 5 years until that got to be too big of a hassle. And I'll still support the Blackhawks, the program that I coach in. We have, right now I have the assistant coaches, 2 kids on my team. I have a couple of kids in the program that, the Bowmans were there, like the Colletons, Seabrooks, the Keiths, there's just so many kids that are Blackhawks.
I thought it was a binary question, yes or no.
No, I got to give my example because a lot of people ask that question.
Okay. So you've got instead of the 15-second elevator spiel, you've got the War and Peace version you were going to go through tonight on.
No, it was 15 seconds, but your attention span is for 4 seconds. So
Okay. All right. This Facebook user, which once again, if you go on through and use the Restream link, and I don't know if I put that up again, I'll think about trying to get that up again next week. The Restream link lets you actually show up on our boards without just being a Facebook user. But this Facebook said, let's hear all of the Brahma's secrets. Well, first of all, if you got us two idiots that do broadcasts twice a week talking about junior hockey, I don't think the Brahmas are too worried about us giving away secrets, because if they hired us in the first place, they don't really have that. They've got a pretty loose, top
There's
secret
no
policy
secret
there
sauce.
yeah, they're not really too worried about it. So if I could ever learn to keep my mouth shut, maybe I could get my top secret clearance back from my military days. But I don't think I could. So anyway, the topic at hand. First of all, once again, always, if you want to say hi, jump on and say hi, whatever source you're watching. If you're watching on Twitter, LinkedIn, if you're watching on Facebook, you're watching on YouTube, throw something in the comments. We'll read the comments and we'll try to get your question up or get your information up. It's always good to see familiar faces and familiar names as we do this. It's a lot of fun. We're going to talk a little bit about the scouting process and, the continuing process, because you really don't restart with scouting. You've always got a base to build off of, and you've already progressed through the spring and summer. And when you're in the spring and summer, what are you doing? You're building your list, and you're watching players to get them to either the pre-draft or to the main camp. And then you filter those guys up, and you filter some of them into the maybe category and some of them in the not so ready for primetime category. And then so you have a list. You've always got a list that you're working with, and you've always got somewhere to start. So it's not like you go, okay, new year, and we've got to get names, because there's already names in the system. There's already kids that were really close to making a team. And this pretty much works across the board from any of the junior leagues. But, we've got experience in just one league. Mike, anything you want to add to that as far as how we start the process and where we go from the beginning?
Well, just to go off of what you were saying, by already having a database of players that we're going to continue to pick up from where we left off from, a lot of these kids that we liked and could have possibly either tendered or drafted along the way last year, maybe we didn't because they were just a little bit further down the list. Maybe they were further down based because of their age, or it could have been because of their ability at that point. But now, as the dust settles, because there's still a lot of kids that might be on our lists that are trying out for different NA teams, or maybe BC or AJ or any of the other different junior leagues, USHL even, and they may not be ready to make those leagues. So if they end up back at midget, then they're back on our radar again. And then we're going to make sure that we're going to continue to follow them. If they're for some reason on a different junior team outside of the NA, we're still going to track them to see how they do now playing junior hockey. And if they're able to, midget hockey and junior hockey, no matter what the junior league is always a transition for a lot of players. So if they are really successful in their junior level, that's still somebody we want to keep on our radar. And then things don't always turn out positively, where some of these kids are still on our radar and then they don't perform as well and they kind of get pushed further down or completely off. And then new players are going to be added that might have been U16 AAA players, and we kind of had our eye on them, but we're still in a wait and see mode. And now all of a sudden they shoot up to the top of our rankings and whatnot. Everything's kind of fluid with where they're at, in the whole ranking system. And that is where our scouts come into play, because we want to get information on these different kids from both direct communication with the kid and the family, but also their coaches to kind of figure out what makes them tick and, all that other stuff. And that'll help move them up or move them down on our ranking system. So our regional scouts are really important in helping us get that information, because they're boots on the ground in these different markets. And in many cases may already be coaching teams that have players we're actively looking at, or they're playing against teams that have players we're actively looking at. So that's kind of how we go into just getting those names of kids that we're going to now look for this next year.
Yeah. So the simple pragmatic part of this is Mike is more watching games. I'm more the systematic guy between the two of us. So Mike loves watching the Brahmas. He'll watch a practice. He'll watch a scrimmage. I tend to watch less of the current team and more out in the field than Mike does. Mike, does both, but spends a lot of time there. But the first place we start with the current roster. How many guys are going to be moving on? How many guys are moving on because their college team, their Division I commitment wants them to start next year? Maybe they have 2 years left, but the school wants them to start a year early. Or how many of them are just aging out? So we always have that in mind. What is our raw number we have to replace? And that absolutely can change through years. There could be a kid that gets injured and is replaced with a younger kid. There could be a kid that decides to move out at the semester break for college and start early. That happens not often, but it happens quite a bit, especially with kids in that last year with birthdays where their time runs out in juniors, and that does happen. We can talk about that on another show at another time. There's other reasons why, there's trades. There could be a trade that happens. So, but we still start with a fundamental number. So if there's a 23-man roster, and let's say there's 8 guys that are going to, age out. Well, we know those are 8 positions we have to fill right off the bat. So that's the easiest way to start the year, is to say, all right, we've got 4 forwards, to take care of, 2 defensemen, and 2 goalies. I'm making this up. This is theoretical right now. So when you have that information and you know that, then you kind of got an idea what to look for. Now that would be real easy if it worked out that way, where it was just a nice stratification even across the board like that, because then the scouting staff can just go out and go crazy, find the best players at every position, and we'll go after them. But it's not that easy, because it never works out that smoothly where you've got that much transition. There might only be 5 spots opening up for some teams. There might be 20 spots opening up on another team. You never know. Some of the new teams this year had to fill a whole season's worth of players right off the bat from zero. They went ground zero and started drafting and tendering players to fill that roster. So part of this process is kind of getting a baseline. What are we looking for? Then the theme of the team comes into play. So after you kind of know, okay, here's how many positions we have to know. What do we need as far as style? Okay. Do we need scoring? Do we need size? Do we need speed? Do we need to really focus on goaltending and build for the back up, or are we looking to build from scorers back? All those things come into play, and that's the part that the nuance starts coming into this, on trying to build with us putting a group of players in front of the coach that the coach likes. Now, fortunately, in our situation, Mike and I are at the pre-draft. Mike and I are at the main camp. Mike and I are there through the whole process of choosing and paring down. A lot of scouting or field personnel, from the scouts to player development directors like we are, don't have that same ability to be there in all those events. They're just out. Maybe they're out in California. Maybe they're out in Boston. They don't actually share as much time around the team. We have a little bit of a say. I would say we have more than a say, which is very rare. You don't usually get the scouting staff in the war room as the team is being picked on the ice from main camp. So we're privileged in that respect. So we're not like a lot of teams. Now, some other teams, there's a lot more emphasis put on the staff, the scouting staff and the scouting department to pick the team. They get involved with trades. They get involved with the tenders. They get involved with the drafts in a much more in-depth way than most teams. But in our situation, we got input on all those things, which is nice. It's nice that that there's input. Sometimes it gets frustrating, and sometimes it's but it should be. It should never be easy if you're advocating for a player you like or a style. But it's our job to put a group of people in front of a head coach who also is the general manager, so he's wearing both hats, that he likes, that he does not have a bias towards because they've got freckles or they're from Nova Scotia or, I saw them wearing boat shoes out in the parking lot. I don't like every player's got you. It's our job to know those kind of nuances around our coaching staff and to make sure we work either around or through or avoid any conflict with those kind of things. Now that sounds, like crazy, but the better you get at this business and the better you are at this job, you start realizing that every single person has a bias, either a strong bias or mild bias for the job they're in and for what they do. It's natural, but it's also natural to understand how to work with that and to work around that. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, I think a couple things that you said that I'll just touch on is it's the scouting staff's job to basically identify players to get them to main camp. And once they're at main camp, it's up to the player, now that they're there, to win their spot on the team. And that's where it does get hard for the scouts and for us, because there's guys we've liked all year long and, advocated for. We either drafted them, we tendered them, or we didn't have those assets. So we really liked them and we still got them in as a free agent. And we want them to make the team. But then as you watch the main camp or you watch the training camp, and as the team starts coming together, if you're fully involved in that whole process, then you can kind of see when guys are kind of playing themselves off the roster. It's when you don't have eyes into that and you're a scout or somebody in our role where you're like, oh my God, how can this guy not make the team? And you have a little bit more emotion into it because you're seeing what you saw in them as a midget player, but you haven't really seen all the practices and all the team stuff that they've been doing as they're ready to start the season, where then it's more of like a shock or a disappointment when those players don't make it. But if you were a part of the whole process, you would truly see that a coach isn't going to just not take a player if he doesn't really make his team better. And when you finally are seeing that, like, to your example of me kind of watching everything that's currently happening, we've been having our training camps going on, and I've been watching everything on Live Barn, which isn't the greatest way to do it, but me being in Chicago and not being able to, obviously travel for every possible scenario, it's worked. So I can see what I need to see at least and contribute to the conversation if asked by, our staff. And that's helpful for me because in years past, maybe I didn't have the same time to be watching during the day and whatever else with having a corporate job. And now I do. And it makes a lot more sense on how all of this stuff comes together and how some of the guys that aren't quite, they're just not getting it. And maybe that means they have to go back and play midget more and get 1 year older, maybe 1 year stronger, or have had the experience of being more in a team environment in the NA, even though they haven't gotten to the regular season, to see it, to see like, this is what it's like. So when next year they try doing it, they're more prepared. So that's
we got some
really
great questions. Good points, Mike. We got some great questions coming in. We're going to hold those off till we kind of walk this process a little more. Once we're at this point where, we know the season's starting, like I said, there's been numerous scrimmages already that our teams had. We're ramping up for Blaine. That really is what the team is doing right now. They're focused on what do we get? 2 games in before Blaine? Is that?
Not every team does, but we actually do. We play real games before we go to Blaine.
Right. So, a couple games in then, but still, Blaine is the big boy because that's where college scouts are at. The building's full. We're all there. And the team gets amped up. Every team in the NAHL shows up there. So that's where I get a chance to watch the team. And like I said, Mike's been spending a lot of time watching. But since main camp, I haven't watched the team. I don't plan on watching the team. I get my feedback through Mike on that. And then my job is to kind of put a strategy together on what I see the vision of where we're going to go to find players. And, we rely on, different pools of players. The pools are pretty simple. You're either going to look at midget players, high school players, and high school's generally going to come out of Minnesota, a little bit of Wisconsin, and a little bit of Detroit. We don't go deep into high school in other markets because it just isn't worth the time. And even some of those markets, it's not worth the time because, I don't want to spend, 48 hours to look at a pool of 6 players. I want to spend 48 hours when I go on the road looking at 20, 30 players that can compete at the NAHL level when I go to watch midgets or high school. So, but it's our strategy to put together the events we want to spend key moments at. Now, the 2 of us will be out in the field too. I like to go out in the field when we have another one of our scouts out there so I can spend time with that scout and actually make sure that we're aligned. Make sure that we're aligned on, how we're looking at players, what we're looking for, and what will make the muster or what will cut the mustard when we get to the next level. Make mustard is a military term. Cut the mustard is, some kind of old phrase from the days, kind of put them together, mixed metaphor kind of thing. But we need to make sure they get to the next level and we find the right kind of guy. So if we can have a really good scout that's putting a lot of work in, but if they're not looking for the right player or the kind of player we want, or if they don't know enough about the league or inside of the league, know enough about the South inside the league, they can be great players that they're presenting, but they'll go nowhere. The players will just fall off the cliff. And that's difficult because scouts all have egos. They all think they're doing a great job. They all think they're finding it really good. And when, Mike or I come in, or even our head coach comes in, Dan Wildfung, and we're at an event and we're watching and he goes, nope. And he makes a really quick decision. That can really cut to the bone on somebody that's not used to that. Or if I say nope, or if Mike says nope, it usually is because we're seeing something that we know doesn't fit the model and off of the experience we have with players that have made it successfully to the next level. So there could be size, it could be speed, it could be parental influence, it could be a lot of things. It could be that he just has a coach at the midget level that just plays the heck out of him, puts him in successful spots, but you notice that when he's never been put in that successful spot, he's not as productive. In other words, you put three good. My son had to deal with that. Back playing for a really big named NHL player as a coach. Players on the team. One guy's in the AHL right now. Most of the guys are really good NCAA players. They're just finishing up their careers. One's in the AHL. He had a hat trick the night before on the power play. And the next night, the coach's son was in that spot and the kid was taken out. Now, I say that because he was trying to put his son in successful spots to make his son look good at any cost. And some coaches will do that, especially parent coaches. And you have to know that and know that the difference between, hey, you really look good if everybody's working to make you look good. But if you're put in the situation where you're on the second or third line, can you make the other players around you better? And can you still flourish in those spots? So a lot of this is, there's a psychology to this and there's a method to this. Every team's different. We're not saying that our model is the perfect model, but it's also a model built on, finding the areas we want to go to the players for. And that's the big difference when Mike and I first started working together is, going into the statistical models of where players are successful, what programs they come from, what coaches they play for that have made them successful up to this point, and starting to ride that horse. It makes the job much easier when you play the stats. Hey, 40% of the players are going to come from that area. We need to really scour that area good. Let's not worry about a place where there's only 2% of the players. Now, that goes that whole adage, and you'll see this all the time. Parents really get told over and over and over again, just stay there because if you're good enough, they'll find you. It's not true. We don't have the time or the resources. USHL coaches don't have the time. Programs don't have the time or the resources to go scour and look under rocks. That's why you'll see the USHL teams at the prime events. You'll see them, they're at Shattuck. They're at Mount Herman. Why am I
Mount St. Charles?
Yeah, Mount St. Charles, not Mount Herman. Mount St. Charles. They're at the better programs. They're at the prep programs. They're scouring where they know players come from a lot. So when we say, hey, you need to be in the best league, that's true. You need to be in the best league because you're going to get looked at more. Now, if you can have a choice in the best league to be on the best team or one of the better teams, all the more. Because when you walk into a building, watch where the scouts go to watch games. They don't go to watch, if there's 30 teams in a showcase, they don't go to watch the 29th play the 30th ranked teams. They go to play 1-2. They go to watch 1-2. They go to watch the first place play the fourth place. They want to be where the numbers are in their favor to see the most talent and see talent against talent. So that's part of the process right now. We're picking out the events for the year where we're steering our scouts and ourselves and our eyes and our resources to try to get the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point you made too, where I think it's more prevalent if people follow college football, where there's certain programs that they have a pipeline, which is a particular high school that they typically get their players from, or a geographical area that they get their players from. It's no different in hockey. And I would say when I look at the pipelines that I have, they're not necessarily based by program at the AAA level or even the junior level. It's by the coach. And in some cases, that coach is always at the same age level at that particular program. So then it could be a program in that sense, but it's mostly a particular coach that is teaching the right stuff. He's developing his players. He's working to advance his players. And we know that when we get that player, he's going to be that much more prepared, because in many cases, these midget coaches, they aren't putting in the time to do video, to teach structure. They've got good players and they just let them play. Well,
Yep.
that could work at midget, but it's not going to work at juniors. And that's a huge learning curve for those players if they're not getting taught more than just wins and losses. And if my 5 guys are better than your 5 guys, we're going to win. There's got to be more teaching to it than that.
I agree to an extent. I agree with you 65-35.
Well, like I said, my pipeline is different than your pipeline.
Yeah,
That's what I look for.
But I believe more in trust in the coach on their ability to give me an assessment because they're around the guy, 7 days a week or 6 days a week. So
Right.
a lot of times, maybe even the coach is a better scout and a better picker of talent than he is as an on-ice coach. Sometimes it's a combined, he's got both. Even some of the powerful level midget coaches out there, or prep coaches or high school coaches, high school coaches, they just got to coach what's in front of them. A lot of time they don't have a chance to, choose who they have on the team. Some of the schools, I guess they do. They can recruit, especially some of the private schools. You get your Detroit Country Days and things like that. But my point is, there's coaches out there that, let me put it frankly, they're shitty on ice coaches. They just have talent, but they're like, yeah, he could play for you in your program. I trust some of those guys because they've given me guys that can play at the next level and really adapt well. And they might even, the coaches might even know that, hey, look, I am not a good X's and O's coach. I just get the horses and run them. Like, to your point, where you think that's a little bit of a negative, I, of course, would love to have a coach that has both of those skills. But a lot of guys out there I trust because they go, no, that kid's a workhorse. That kid does this, that kid does that, and I really like him. He might not have the capacity to coach that kid the way he'll get coached at the next level, but he knows that's the right fit, and that helps a lot. Having that trust, and where do you get that trust? College coaches give us referrals. Advisors mostly give the referrals to the head coach. Advisors don't come to us as much as they do the head coach because they're lobbying him to get spots for their players, and they want to go directly to the source. They don't want to walk through anybody else but him. But that's the nature of the game. And so the planning process. Anything else you want to talk about? How we go about getting this the new season started?
Well, I would say it's really trying to draw territorial lines between the different staffs that are regional, because it seems simple in practice, but the fact that there's so much overlap, like I live here in Chicago. So technically, like anything that's happening in Chicago, I'm going to try to get eyes on. Well, if it's not 2 Chicago teams playing each other, we're going to have Detroit coming into town. We're going to have St. Louis coming into town. We're going to have Wisconsin coming into town. Well, we also have scouts that are in those areas. So with overlap with travel or tournaments and showcases and whatnot, we don't all want to be stepping on each other's toes by contacting the same coaches and talking about the same players and all these different things. So it's more setting that expectation as far as control this part of it. And when things start overlapping, let's make sure that if let's just say, Jeff, you're, instead of using our scouts names, you're working on somebody from Rochester, New York, where you're from, and all of a sudden I see them come into town, I am not just going to go and start talking to players and coaches from that Rochester team until I've talked to you and you say, hey, make sure you talk to X, Y, and Z. I've already been talking with them.
Yep.
I'll be down there and make sure I have a presence and they know we're watching them. Or if you've already had conversations with the coach, I'll just say, hey, I know you're talking with Jeff, blah, blah, blah. It just makes for a lot better of a process. So it's just having the staff understand these types of things.
So I got a question that came in. What are the best events that you attend to find players? Well, it's pretty simple. The events we like to be at and the events we can make it at. Remember, every team's under a limited budget. That's why you rely on the regional scouts to be at things. Minnesota high school playoffs, done. You always want to have somebody there watching. You always want to have some kind of presence. We've been fortunate. We've had some really good people over the last couple of years. I know this year is a transition for us there, but having that event covered and having Minnesota covered now, it's hard to get Minnesota players away from Wisconsin and Minnesota in that region for NAL teams. And it makes sense. If I can play for a quality NAL team in the area where my parents can drive an hour or two or a few hours to watch a game, why wouldn't I want to play there? So it's they've got an advantage in that area for quality players that we have to overcome. Do we do it? Yeah, we do it, but it's harder to get a kid out of there. We like to watch the showcases. Tier 1 Elite is always a big event wherever their showcases are at for us to be at. But there's, for example, Maha does one that I believe is next weekend in Detroit. There's a Pittsburgh showcase coming up. There's all kinds of showcases that are popping up. We like to be at as many as possible. Now, remember, this is the hardest thing for parents to understand. And this is a great information source for you on this. If I walk into a building and there's 30 Tier 1 Elite teams playing, let's just use that league as an example. If I've got Friday and Saturday to watch games, and I pull in Friday at noon, I'm going to leave at Saturday at 5, okay? So I'm limited on my schedule on how many games I can watch. I'm going to try to watch as many games, but I walk in the door, I've already had a conversation with 5, 6, 8, 10 coaches, depending on how many I can get a hold of, how many I have relationships with, how many are accessible, and how many want to talk to junior teams, the coaches. So I start going down the list, talking to the coaches I know. I'll call this coach, I'll call that coach. Maybe Little Caesars is in it, maybe Victory Honda's in it, Bell Tire, all the Detroit coaches that I know. Maybe there's Esmark's in it, so I'm going to talk to them, even though Esmark's not a Tier 1 Elite. But I'm calling my list of coaches, and I'm getting their recommendations off their rosters, and I'm getting recommendations from the rest of the league on them. So, okay, here's who you got. Who would you watch on the other teams? Who are the guys that you think are studs on other teams? So now I've got a list there. Now I'm cross-referencing that with any players that have reached out to us. I just got a couple emails today from players reaching out saying, hey, here's what tournaments I'm in, or here's what games I'm playing in this season. Would love to have you come out and watch. And then I'm looking at him going, okay, he's worth watching. He's got a resume that's worthy of watching. He's playing on a team that's pretty good. I'll give the kid a chance and give him a look. College coaches do the same thing. You got your list that you've been recommended. Then you've got a list of people that reached out to you. You may only give 10% of your time to that list of people that reached out to you. You're going to give 90% here. And then that's where people don't always get it. Well, that guy watched the whole game. Well, maybe I was watching 4 or 5 guys that were recommended to me that I really wanted to focus on first. Does it mean I can't see the rest of the players on the ice? No, but let's say your son Johnny's flying down the ice, gets the puck chipped up to him from the guy I'm watching, and the guy I'm watching drives the net hard. So I'm watching the guy driving the net hard. I'm not looking at who shot the net or puck at the net. I'm trying to see what that kid can do and what he's doing. So I always say this. There could be 10 forwards on the ice. I mean, not including the goalies, just 10 players on the ice. And I'm focused on 1 or 2 of those players every shift because I'm trying to focus in on what they can do. I might not watch anything else going on the ice, even when the kid doesn't have a puck. I can go a whole game with focusing on a couple players. I'm watching them on the bench. I'm watching them drink water. I'm watching the interactions with a coach. So Johnny could score 4 goals in that game. And if my eyes are never on Johnny because I'm watching the other team or I'm watching another player, you can't always assume that because a scout's in the building, he's watching your son. Now, that's an extreme situation because if a kid's got 4 goals, I'm sure we're going to watch him. But if your kid's just out there playing and he's having a good day but not a great day, I might not see him because I've got my eyes on the list that I walked in the door with, however I reached it. So you got to keep that in mind. So impact play, 4 goals is going to get us looking. Okay, don't get me wrong. But you always have to keep in mind, too, working the phones, the texts, emails, doing all the things you need to do as a player, as a parent, along with your coach. And if you do get into advisors, that stuff's all important. You've got to do that stuff because you want to make sure you get eyes on yourself. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I would just say too that the other thing that I think drives parents nuts too is just the fact that with all the video platforms and everything that us, people in the scouting industry have, in many cases, we may not be physically at all the events. We'd like to because it is the best way to scout, but there's plenty of times where, I coach two teams myself, so I'm not available to go to every single event. And honestly, one of the things that drives me nuts talking about Tier 1 Elite is they are in Chicago every single year for Martin Luther King weekend. That's when the showcase always is. I am always out of town with my teams playing, so I can't physically be at those events to watch in person. But we are still watching these games online, and we are still watching these players, more importantly, online, because one of the things that I don't think people necessarily realize is when they think we're watching online, they think we're watching the full game online. In many cases, there's a couple handful of players, to your point, that are on our list that we may just be watching those particular players' shifts and only their shifts, not the whole game, but our platforms will chop it down per shift, and we're only watching those specific kids. So to your point on like what else is going on around them, if other players from other teams are scoring in that game and whatnot, there's a chance we don't see it because we're not actually watching the full game if we're not physically in attendance.
Yeah.
But that is why being in attendance is so much more valuable because you can get a full scan of everything that's going on, not just what the lens is showing you.
So to get back to that question, Blaine is important for us because we get to see our junior team. We get to see what the other junior teams look like. And so Mike and I get a good baseline of what the league looks like this year. Sometimes the league is strong and fast. Sometimes the league's very, it's not as strong and fast across the board. And it's just like any other part of hockey. There's some classes, don't quote me on this. The 1995 class is different than the 97 class, is different than the 01 class, which is different than the 04 class. They're all different. They're different sizes of the amount of kids in the overall pool. They're different on the amount of top end players. So every year things change, and it changes for the USHL. It changes in the NHL draft. There's years in the NHL draft that none of the top 10 players become superstars. Then there's other drafts where you've got they're 3 rounds deep of kids that are become superstars in the league, or stars in the league, I should say. So that's important. What events do we go to? That Blaine event also has the U18 NAPHL event attached to it. So in the same building, we're able to watch a U18 game or 4 or 5 U18 games and then watch a NAL game or 2. We don't spend all day watching NAL games. We spend most of the time watching the NAPHL U18. The events I like to be at, I love to be at Beast. Now this year there's no HPHL events because the league took a year off here, but those teams are still playing and they're going to attach to other things. I like to watch the Michigan High School All-Star Maha or whatever they call it, which is a midget tournament, but it's sponsored by the midget high school or something. It's in Troy, Michigan. It's coming up because that gives you a taste of midget players and some high school players combined. So you can kind of see, because the high school players get to play midgets up until, November, and then they switch over. So it's kind of a split season thing. I like to watch those Beast events. I like to be at the Beast events. And I know I'm missing some events, but I'm giving you the general, taste of where we're at. We don't get too many East Coast things that are attached to like the USPHL. Those teams, we don't get as much of that. But the East Coast teams that are up in the Northeast will get a chance to watch some of those. That's when you get into the Long Island area and some of those teams in that area, there's always some good hockey in there. We talked about Minnesota high school. Then there's prep, and prep is a little bit different. We don't get, prep is not a natural channel to the NAL. Prep is not, it has never been marketed to the NAL the right way. There has been some changes over the last few years. We're starting to see more prep players at the NAL level. So we do spend time watching prep, but nowhere near as much as we spend watching um, junior leagues in Canada, other junior leagues in the United States, and Tier 1 Elite. Those are our bread and butter. And so other events that we go to, now that the border's back open, that last year it opened up more. Now it's free flow again. I'll get up into Toronto area and in the Ontario area, and I'll be watching OJ games. Buffalo's right next to me, so I'll be watching the OJ team in Buffalo quite a bit because the teams come in to play them. I use them as their baseline team, and we look at watching those leagues as much as we can too. So hopefully that helps. Let's get on and see if there's any other questions here. Oh, here's an interesting one. This might be from the same person. I don't know. If you were setting up a scouting staff for an NAHL team, what would that look like? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think you got to cover specific geographical markets to make sure you have a presence there. So that's the first thing I would do. But you also have to find the right type of people to take on those different opportunities. So not everybody sees.
You hire somebody that knows it.
You got somebody over your shoulder? Who are you pointing to?
Never mind.
So, but yeah, there's a lot of people who have been around hockey, whether they were a player, they may even be coaching and whatnot. That does not mean they have an eye for talent. So sometimes people get into scouting or want to scout mostly. I won't say mostly. Sometimes they get involved to try to better their own kid's situation or different things like that. And because of that, they are not the best resource for a team to bring on because they're singly focused on trying to help promote their own kid or player. Or they're with a program that they're trying to just focus on promoting their team's players.
Yep.
So it's just so narrow and it's not for the right reasons that it's not always easy to see that at the beginning when you bring them on board because they're not just going to come out and say, hey, yeah, I want this job because I'm trying to help my kid get to play in the North American League. But sometimes that's what happens. So first is, again, you want to cover specific geographical markets that are really important because they are pipelines and they have good hockey or good hockey's coming there so you can see a lot of good games. And then also they have the right type of eye and they have the right approach for what is necessary to be in that role.
Yeah, and there's some training that makes a scout a better scout. Teaching scouts, young scouts especially, or even people that have been around the game a long time, watch away from the puck. You don't have to watch the puck to find good players. In fact, watching away from the puck gives you 10 times more information than watching where the puck is and watching it as a fan. A fan will watch the puck and watch the play develop around the puck. Good scouts may never. You can always tell by what's going on with the other 9 guys what the puck's doing. Okay, you know where things are going, and so you don't really need to watch that. You can watch how guys play away from the puck, which gives you the idea of, do they know their position? Are they anticipating the right things? Can they skate? Do they skate when they're not part of the play, or do they only get excited and skate when the puck's on their stick or they're about to get the puck? So learning that process is huge for scouts. And, I was taught early on by, some really, really good coaches. I was in the stand sitting with Red Berenson when I first got to Michigan, and he would just walk through, what do you see out there? What do you see out there? And talk to me about things when I was still a student. And that really helped. Coach Powers out of Bowling Green, huge help, sitting with him and watching the game. Even watching with the coach that's at Fredonia right now, boy, oh boy, I just lost track of his name. Anyway, watching how he went about it in the stands, watching with Mercyhurst's Coach Gotkin down there. When you're a coach at that level, I was a young assistant coach and got to sit with these guys and just listen to what they were doing and watching what they were doing and what notes they were taking. You can learn a lot just by watching really good people at their jobs. But they also, all of them have a couple traits that are all alike. First of all, they're not going to tell you who they really like when other coaches are around. Okay, so you go up and talk to them. They keep their players to themselves. That's whatever they're looking at. They might go, oh yeah, that kid's pretty good. but that's about all you're going to get out of them because they're not going to really tip their hand. But the other thing they do is they systematically look at everything on the ice. They don't just look at where the puck's moving and what the puck's doing.
Yeah, I think for me, when I started scouting in the North American League, it probably took me 3 years before I really got my bearings of what type of player not only fits within the NA, but also fits in the South Division and fits for the Lone Star Brahmas. So there were 3 layers that I had to kind of sort out because my first taste of scouting actually was in the USHL. It's a lot easier, I should say, scouting in the USHL because you truly can, pick a U15 or U16 AAA game and try to find the very best players on the ice. And those are the guys you start looking at. In many cases, if you're looking at the very best players, like at U18 AAA, some of those kids are going to end up in the USHL. So they're not even options for us. And not always the most talented, the best skater, like, name all those different adjectives that you could, or all those skill sets you could pick off of a player, doesn't always mean that they're going to be the right fit for us because there's more to it. And, some of the little messages that we had of telling the Brahma secret sauce, I'm not going to share that, but it took me a little while to figure out what is that little secret sauce that we look for in a player that we know is going to be an immediate fit and, take off once they finally get there. And a lot has to go through that learning process before you fully get it. And I think we've got people on our staff now that have been doing it for, 2, 3 years now, some 4. And it's like, now they really are getting it. Like their players not only are making the team, but they're going to be difference makers on the team.
Well, that's the biggest thing is scout when you first get into this, there have been people on our scouting staff over the last few years that are really interested in doing a good job. They put a lot of energy in it, but a lot of the players they run up the flagpole aren't the right players, and they get frustrated because they don't have anybody on the current roster that was their person, their guy, and that's very, very frustrating because, I could be in the rink the same weekend they are and have 2 or 3 players that I'm watching and progressing with that get drafted and make the roster, and their players were just as good. Their players were just as good as those guys on the ice, but they weren't the right fit. Maybe they, for whatever reason, there's just all the intangibles that go into this. So it does take some time. And in your situation, Mike, the credit to you is you're able to do that in a non-null market, and you had to learn the league, not having the league in your back door, in your backyard, to really understand that level. And
keep my back door out of this.
See, this is PG, man, PG. You got to be careful there, man. We're going to get canceled now. We're going to have protesters. There's going to be torches on my front porch now because of some silly
we had a good run
conversation. So anyway, hope that helps. Thank you for some of the people jumping in late. I see a lot of people coming in. Chris, Andrew, appreciate you coming. San Diego in the house. Andrew's coming in from New Brunswick, Canada. Appreciate everybody that's jumping on. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to throw your thoughts out and have a conversation. A lot of times the actual comment board gets in a conversation where it confuses me because they're chatting among themselves on the comment board versus actually directed straight at us. But another comment, it's a little longer. I'm not going to post it in here. It says, how often are the player attitudes and abilities to get along within the team and the coaches that come into play, even highly talented skill sets? There's head cases. Well, so here's the thought on head cases. And there's the sanitary answer, which is the politically correct answer of, we put a lot of effort into, studying all aspects of a player's psychological abilities and, his home life and all. Of course we do. Of course you're going to talk to the parents. Of course you're going to get some assessment from the coach. But if a kid's putting up 50 goals in 30 games and he's really good, are we going to give him a shot? Hell yeah. That's just the bottom line. People say, well, he doesn't have the grades to play in the NCAA. I can tell you what, there's some dumb as rocks players, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, dumb as rocks player playing NCAA Division I because they're really good. Okay. So if they're really good, there's a risk reward. How much risk are you willing to take to offset that locker room? Maybe you bring them in with a really short leash. That happens all the time. Coaches will bring in a player, but they tell them right off the bat, hey, look, you've got a reputation of X, Y, or Z. You're a hothead. You're not good in the locker room. You cause problems, whatever it is, or you're dumb as rocks. Most of the time, coaches don't come right out and tell a player that. But academically not strong players, kids with different psychological issues, there's going to be somewhere out there. Maybe it's not with our program, but somebody will give a kid a shot that's really good. You're going to play at the higher levels if you're really good. Now, once again, you even see it in the NHL. You see guys and you're like, why do they keep that guy around? He's such a train wreck. Nobody on the team. It happens in football. You got guys in football that quit right in the middle of the games. Literally quit right in the middle of a game.
Retire.
Yeah. You got guys that talk about their coaches that are chaos. I mean, what's the one guy with the Iverson? Remember him with his practice monologue? Practice? I don't need to practice. What's practice? It ain't a game. Just practice. Okay, but he still played in the league. He's a Hall of Famer. Head cases, if they have talent, will play. Nobody wants to say that, though. Everybody wants to give the politically correct answer. Oh, we look at academics, and academics are very important in our program. Of course. Except for overwhelming talent. And then that all goes out the window. I hope that's the real world. I mean, Mike, you probably won't agree with me, but that's
now for me. If you've got character issues, you're off my roster. So, but I agree with you.
You also know you've been around this long enough to know that what I'm saying is right. That
and I think it depends on what the issue is. If it's more of like a discipline type thing, like maybe acting out on the ice or doing different stuff like that, you may be able to coach that out of a kid. And maturity could obviously influence that a little bit as well as they get older. But if it's anything like drugs or any of that stuff, like it's not even worth it.
That's a different story. If you're addicted or you've got alcohol issues or things like that, but I can tell you, over the years I've run into some crazy situations. Addicted to online material. Had a player with that situation. What's that?
Video games is a big one now.
No,
kids
not video games.
No, but I'm saying
material.
I understand. I was just throwing something else out there.
I had one player here one time. I had a program that was really good to me that always gave me a suite, and then they always had it set up in the hotel room where there was a meeting room that was attached to my room. So we could have, in a showcase, we could have our meals in there. We could have film sessions in there. We could have team building, social time with the parents, whatever it was. But we had a room set up next to mine. I usually left the door open, and the room would have snacks in there. It would have sodas in there. The kids kind of hung out in there. One night, I went to dinner with, I think, my coaching staff or something, or maybe even the team. And one player stayed back and went into my room and ran up like $400 of online or on TV stuff. And I got the bill from the parents, and the parents are like, "Coach, we're really good to you with our boosters club and everything, but $400, we could probably deal with 20." I'm like, $400 of what? I didn't order room service. What are you talking about? And we had one player that just went movie after movie while the team was out to dinner, or where I was out of the room, and just racked it up. And it's funny now, but it wasn't very funny at the time because I had to have a sit down with this kid and say, "Hey, look, maybe save a little of that energy for the on ice part of the game."
Yikes!
Oh yeah, it was yikes. It was a big yikes. Okay, okay. Do regular scouts look at goalies too, or do they have special scouts? That's a great question.
I think we all look at goalies as we're, tracking a game and whatnot, but it's such a technical position that we do have a goalie scout on staff. And we also have our goalie coach that does a lot of the scouting as well. And actually our head coach is really good at scouting goaltenders as well. So we lean more on them, I would say, to answer your question than my opinion or probably Jeff's opinion or other people's, because they're not, we can identify good players, But then once we get a grouping of good players, they can really dissect that ranking system better than we can. So I think us scouts and regional scouts, we can identify, hey, there's a goalie we should have a look at. And then we kind of kick it over to the more specialized eye to really dissect it further.
I agree. I am the first one to admit that spending time watching goalies, unless I've been assigned to watch goalies, it's really not where I spend most of my focus at. I mean, if there's a kid that really catches my eye, I forward it over. In our case, forward it over to Lori and say, Lori, what do you think about this kid? Or Lori and Dan, and have a conversation with them. But I agree with you. Now, with that said, over the years, I've seen Division I coaches or NHL guys walk into a rink, sit down, and see a flurry of action on a goalie and make a decision on a goalie in the positive in less than 5 minutes. Literally less than 5 minutes. I've seen a goalie stand on his head to get his team to overtime, and then after overtime, standing on his head, do really well in the shootout, and boom, he's got 3 Division I coaches lined up outside the locker room to talk to him, all wanting to sign him. He was not even on the radar before that.
Right.
So goalies I don't see that. I've never experienced that with a defenseman or a forward where instantly, on a dime, people can make decisions on them. But you'll see that in the goalie world. Some goalies have to creep up. Other goalies have to just keep running from program to program. And when I mean that, they're not getting run out of a program, but they're not getting opportunities. There was a kid named Takix that played in the South Division a few years ago, and he bounced around. He was on he had a horrible goals against, had a horrible save percentage, and then bang, he's on a Robertson Cup team because it just took some time for the right, the circumstances where he got a chance to boom, jump, and when he got that opportunity with the right team, all of a sudden, bang, he's there, and good things are happening. So you never know. You just never know. Goalies it's a different world. If you're a goalie parent, you already know this. If you're a goalie, you already know this. But for the rest of you out there, that ain't going to happen if you're a forward or a defenseman. Most cases, that's still a limited amount of goalies that get that opportunity. But I can tell you, the goalies I refer usually stand on their head in a game, and I go, wow, that's pretty special. I don't know the last 2 or 3 years of the kid's history. I don't know how he looks in practice. And I could go to a practice and watch, so many practices at the midget level and the high school level are not geared to make goalies look good. They're geared for teams to score 3-on-1s, 2-on-0s, so you're getting situations where goalies aren't put in the best situation to show their true skill set. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way most coaches work. They don't put their goalies in a situation where it's realistic for a goalie. I mean, are they going to see a 2-on-0? Maybe. Are they going to see a 3-on-1? Probably. But, are you going to see 2-on-2s a lot? Yeah. Goalies look a lot better in 2-on-2s than they do 2-on-0s. So let's see what else we got. Do you use outside scouting resources like RinkNet or Neutral Zone? So that's a great question. Mike, do you want to jump that one, or do you want me to take that?
You take it. I'll pick up anything you leave out.
Okay. So, yes, we all use RinkNet. RinkNet is supplied by the league. It's a backdoor system. RinkNet is used by NHL, Division I. It's used for USHL. Everybody's got access to RinkNet. It's a great platform. It's built to control a whole scouting staff. So we know what's going on with our scouts. We know what input they're getting. We see their notes. And when it's done right now, there's times where depending on who's managing RinkNet on our end, 2 years we were really good at RinkNet. This year we're not so good. This upcoming season we're going to be a lot better than we've ever been at RinkNet because we're going to really rely on the source more. Neutral Zone is unique, and it's hard to talk about Neutral Zone because Neutral Zone used to be, and they've transitioned. They're not completely transitioned. They used to be a vanity service. Oh, we'll write 500 words, 1,000 words, 5,000 words on your kid. We'll give you a taste of it with a little email. Hey, we wrote an article about your kid in our Neutral Zone report. We ranked your kid in the top 15,000 players in the United States, and buy our subscription, and you can see that. They've evolved. Now they are part of Elite Prospects, which is also connected to RinkNet, and they've become more of a legitimate source, at least at the higher end. I can't say that we don't rely on them, but now they do have reports out ranking players. They rank NHL players. They rank the top junior players. What's that?
They do USHL guys too.
Yeah. So it's not so much for us, but so Neutral Zone has a role that's evolving and changing. And I like it because nobody looks at I can tell you nobody with legitimacy spends much time looking at reports that are vanity reports. Nor do, the NOL coaches, the USHL coaches, Division I, Division III coaches aren't turning to any video channel or any other source outside of RinkNet Elite Prospects in a couple things that are like standard platforms. We don't sign up for, what is it, NCS, what is the National Collegiate, where they do all sports, and you can put your bio on there and you can put your video on there. Those things aren't used. ACHA coaches use them because ACHA coaches are working in a region. They've got limited budgets. That's College Club. They'll jump on things like that and look for players because they can't get out and watch, hockey like we can. But no, we're not using those kind of things. We've got an internal source. The USHL and the NUL have. Mike and I were just talking about this the other day. They have a central scouting staff and a central scouting unit. That really isn't our source either. We are internalized. We pretty much put together organically what we do. Now remember, that includes college coaches that talk to any of our staff and our head coach primarily. We're talking about advisors that we have relationships with. Mike has a core group of advisors he knows. I have a core group of advisors I know. And our head coach has a core group of advisors he knows, and so do all of our scouts. So it's coaches, scouts, and other coaches that build this network for us. Now, our network is different than any other team. They're all unique footprints. Some don't have as much of a network, and they rely on one or two people to go out there and watch players directly. We don't. We rely on a lot of people to give us input, and then we triangulate that. Mike sees a great player. He wants my eyes on it, another scout's eyes on it, our head coach or our assistant coach's eyes on it. And we try to triangulate on that guy. If I interview a player and his family, I want Mike to interview the player and the family before we get him to the coaching staff. So we try to get as many eyes on people as we can. Hopefully that helps. That was a great question, though. Mike, anything to add?
Well, I would just add, typically from a video platform perspective, we would also have like Instat available to us. Now, the league is actually, the NA at least, has moved away from Instat this next year. So we're going to have a new platform. I believe it's called the Prospect Exchange, which I think used to be Iceberg, if people are familiar with that platform. It's exactly the same thing as what Instat was. That gives us the ability to really watch any of the different, whether it's junior games or AAA games. And that's when, of course, you can break it down by a player shift and things like that. So that'll be a new platform for us to all have to learn, but that's essentially what we'll have. And then also the NA has the NA TV or NAHL TV now that's going to have all the NAPHL games, all the NA3 games, and all the NA games. So that's an additional.
The BCHL did the same thing. They segregated off. So I'm not sure why people are pulling away from Hockey TV. Maybe it was service, maybe it was price. I don't know what the.
Well, I think Hockey TV merged with Flow Hockey now, so they'll have like the USHL, and I think everybody's just kind of more league specific with what they're doing. I'm not sure why, but that's what it's going to be. So those are just a couple platforms in addition to like RinkNet that we'll utilize throughout the year.
And we utilize a lot of this. Okay, legal pads, spreadsheets. We're building notes all over the place, and we rely on emails. There's emails right now that I'm going through that I received 2 years ago on players to make sure that I'm following up with those names, and I still look at names and say, okay, he signed here, or he is no longer in hockey, or boy, he's moving up through the ranks, and let's keep an eye on him. So that those lists build, and a lot of this is not relying on those outside sources. A lot of it's relying on amassing everything into one place from all the minds that we have already, all the individuals that have information on players, and then sifting through it to find, it's think of it as panning for gold. Okay, we've got all this stuff, this soot coming in, and we've got to shift through that a little bit and pick out the right pieces of it, and the pieces of gold out of that. And that's really what the whole year is. We get a lot of information. We get players, coaches, people. A lot of people through this broadcast get a hold of us with player information. We got to sift through all that, and by the time advisors and players and coaches, and then remember, we didn't even talk about Europe, which Europe is a whole nother. We'll talk about that at some other point. We have to have eyes in Europe too, and we have to assess how a kid will correlate into our league and specifically our team from Europe. Now, you want to talk about a trip? Take a kid out of Finland or Czechoslovakia or Sweden and throw them into Texas, and their first game is against Louisiana, or their first game is in New Mexico, and you're seeing cows and belt buckles and trucks with steamship ports coming out the back end with soot coming out of them. I don't know why they do that, but they put these big exhaust systems off the back of their trucks to throw that black smoke out of their diesels. That's playing in the South. There's a big difference in just the environment you're playing in when you get down to the South and you're playing in Dallas, or you're playing in Odessa, or you're playing in Shreveport. It's a culture shock for a lot of these kids, and you got to take that into account too. He looks really good. I call them turtleneck players. What you don't want to be is a turtleneck player going into the South. If you got to wear the little turtleneck, maybe it's time to think about another league to play in, because that's that. What was the kid that played in the Mighty Ducks that wore the turtleneck from the other team that had to come over to?
Adam Banks.
Yeah, you can't be an Adam Banks in this league. Anything else, Mike?
No, well, I was thinking of a story that just happened for me this past summer, where you were talking about just how like people have different networks, and we're all working through like different coaches and other scouts and whatnot. And it's just so funny how small the hockey community is. Where I was actually watching the Chicago Steel main camp, and I go in there, and there's a ton of NA scouts and other USHL scouts and things like that on top of all these D1 guys. Well, there's certain guys that I'm familiar with from being at all these events because they're in the NA. So I'm chumming it up with all of them, and it's kind of a tight-knit community amongst us all. And I'm sitting up there, and there's all these D1 guys that are also kind of up there as well. So the first day, I'm just kind of in my own section, kind of scouting the games or whatever. And then I talked to our head coach, Dan Wildfong, afterwards, and he's like, hey, what college guys were there? So I'm telling them, hey, this guy from this school, this guy from this school, they were all sitting around. And he's like, did you talk to any of them? I was like, no, I'm not going to bother them. Like, they're there doing their thing. And he's like, you got to go talk to them. And one of the guys was North Dakota's coach, Brad Berry. And he's like, oh, me and him go way back. You got to go talk to him. So I was like, I'm not talking to Brad Berry. He's like one of the like premier college hockey coaches. I'm not going to go over and just start bothering him. So the next day after talking to Dan, I'm like, if he's here, I'll just go over and say hello. So I end up getting there like way early for whatever reason. Like there's figure skaters on the ice and whatever. So I'm going to the same section I was in before, which is so funny because once I finally got there and everyone filled in again, it was the exact same guys sitting in the exact same sections. But as I'm walking up, I got to walk all the way up the bleachers if you've ever been to the Chicago Steel building, because we want to all stay up at the top. Yep. And I look, and there's no one else in the bleachers but Brad Berry. He's the only one, and he's in the exact same spot. I'm in the exact same spot. So now I'm thinking, perfect opportunity. I'm going to go up and introduce myself. So I start walking up the stairs, and I'm not looking up. So I'm just kind of looking down as I walk up. Next thing I know, I see feet, and it's him. And I look up, and he's like, hey, I saw you here yesterday. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brad Berry. And I'm like, yeah, I know who you are. Like, we're joking around and everything. He's like, I saw the Lone Star jacket. Me and Fonger, we go way back. I'm like, holy cow, like this guy, I'm nobody in his world. And he happened to see who I was from a program that he knows the coach and decided he was going to come and introduce himself to me. So we talked for, 20 minutes or so about different players. And he was actually telling me certain guys that he was there watching and wanted to know if I had seen them throughout the year and what my opinion was. And, he's got one of our former goalies that was in Lone Star on his team for next year. So we were talking about that. Just a really cool experience. And I'm thinking at the time, like, I would have never probably gone up and said anything to him because I don't like to bother people, but it's such a small
pansy
community.
ass. You're a pansy ass. Are you kidding me? You've been in the building with me enough to know what I'm like. I'm just the opposite.
Oh, well,
I want you to meet this guy, and you go over here and meet this guy, and we sit down next to people and we're having lunch, and there's two coaches there, college coaches for a program that we don't even know existed, and we're starting up a conversation because you never know when that guy's going to get a D1 job. And I'm introducing you to my old players that now are D1 coaches, and and trying to to me, those events are just the opposite of the way you look at them. I want to network with, especially, I tend to be more on the more mature side of my adulthood as far as age. That's a kind way of saying that. I don't know the assistant coaches. I mean, some of the guys are guys that played for me that are assistant coaches at that level, but I don't know a lot of those guys anymore. So I need to work that crowd a little bit more and open up the doors and shake hands and say, hey, how you doing? So I'm different than you on that side. I want to go up and say hi and talk to those guys, have lunch with them, sit down with them and chat. And it's not because it's an ego thing like, oh, I know so-and-so. It's because there can be one kid that comes up in a conversation. Boy, oh boy, I really like this kid over on, that team. Oh boy, I don't even have to, I haven't watched that team yet. But if there's a D1 or 2 or 3 D1 guys that are already talking about that guy, there's something to look at there. And so a lot of times it's just a way to get another name or to find out what they're looking at and to find out who's involved. I was watching this kid out of the Bell Tire program. I really like that defenseman over there. Yeah, we do too. What do you think? Is he USHL material or not? He goes, well, borderline maybe, but I think he's really good for the null. But we like him a lot. Those kind of conversations happen a lot when you get into those D1 conversations. Here's a good question that came up. Let's jump on this and then let's call it a day. Who drives the search for players after initial roster is set? There seems to always be new players coming in from NCDC or Canada Juniors after the start of the season. Great question. So the premise is, okay, junior team is set, and then all of a sudden, a week later, 2 weeks later, there's a kid coming in from here, coming in from there. And it's just not coming in from Canadian Juniors, but that is a source. The NCDC, not as much there, but there's some reasons for that too. USHL, trickle down, yes. BCHL, something happened there. All those, come into play where kids come in. Mike, I've got my opinions on this. You shoot first. What do you say to somebody that's asking that question?
Well, it's hard to pinpoint because there's a lot of different ways that this happens, and you kind of address them. There's always the trickle down that happens because these rosters have to get condensed by certain periods of time. So there's just a natural cut down. So that's a little bit easier. We kind of talked about this on our last episode of that trickle down and how these different teams, will get a couple players as the season's already started. And that might move some guys that thought they had a spot on their roster now off the roster and whatnot. But a lot of it is generated off of advisors generate a lot of that. Colleges generate a lot of that where they have a player that they've committed and maybe they're not in a good spot where they're not really playing or they're kind of put in a role that doesn't fit with what the college thinks is best for the player. And same from the advisor perspective. So now they're kind of shopping that player as if like, hey, we got to move because it's not the right fit and he's not going to get the development he needs type of deal. And that's where you see coaches that are very highly connected, or programs that are perennial top programs or top of the league, potential to win type of deal. Yeah, those coaches usually get the first call because they want to move their player to a good program or to a good coach.
Remember, this is a business. First and foremost, at the NAL level, at the BCHL level, at the USHL level, there's owners that want to put butts in seats. So absolutely, is this a development league to get you into NCAA Division I programs? It is. But if there's a player that will make your team better, that will give you more wins, will put more excitement into your fan base, and they're available, this is not youth hockey where there's a loyalty to the team throughout the whole year. Your loyalty is to your brand. Your loyalty is to your team in general, but not to the individual components. And that's really crass to say, but that's the reality. If you are not performing, you'll get some leash. But if you're not performing enough and another player is available, there's going to be a move made if you're not performing and you've ran out of leash there. Coaches are patient, okay? But they're not patient on situations where they know, wow, this kid's really borderline with us right now, and I've got an opportunity to bring in somebody that's going to push our roster down from the top. That means that something on the bottom is going to give. Or maybe it's not even on the bottom. Maybe it's in the middle of the roster. And this could be one of those situations, going back to what we talked about with attitude. Maybe a coach has already found out he's got an attitude problem early in the year, and there's a player available and he can eliminate that attitude. That's making a statement with his team. Okay, little Johnny on the team, and this is in general, any team, but on a Null team, is a second-line player, and he's in the top 5 of scoring on the team, and it's mid-September, but he's a pain in the ass. And the coach is giving him, many opportunities to change his ways over the first month they're together and from main camp on, and little Johnny doesn't want to make the changes. You're making a statement to your team that, hey, we're putting this team first over attitude. Boom, make the change, bring in somebody else, replace that player, and everybody wins in that situation except maybe not Johnny. But Johnny was given opportunity after opportunity to fix that. So I know I sound hypocritical there that, talent is always going to win. I didn't say talent is always going to win. Talent will give you that risk-reward situation, and if the risk is overcoming the reward side of it, that's when little Johnny's out the door. And coaches will do that all the time. They'll take a chance on a guy with a little bit of an attitude. They'll take a chance on a guy that might not fit exactly, but he's super good. But if it's not working out, there's a short leash there. And that's why you'll see guys coming in, mid-September, or maybe even a little bit later into September, maybe early October. And it's the USA trickle downs. And it's a guy that was playing prep that doesn't have good grades and or doesn't like prep, thought he was going to, stick it out for one more year in prep, wants to leave and come to juniors. It's a guy playing in the Canadian junior leagues that, wants to be closer to home. Maybe played in the juniors last year, got traded to a team, too far away from, where he feels comfortable, and he wants to come closer to home. All kinds of reasons there. But trickle down really is, we're in the middle of that trickle down process right now. We're in the middle of that all flushing out over the next, what do you think, 2 weeks, Mike? Where you will see a lot of.
Yeah, I think USHL, it's got to be like October 1st is when their first cut down is, or their first, where they got to get their roster size down to.
Is it October 1st, that late? Wow.
I got to look again, but I think it's either end of September or October 1st.
Yeah.
And then the trickle downs, just everyone's kind of moving around for a couple weeks after that until they kind of find their spot. So we'll check on that as far as the exact date, but I know it's into September, October-ish is when that happens.
Yeah, so maybe it's 3 or 4 weeks of that, but those things all come into play. And who has the final say? Hey, look, the final say is always the owner of whatever team you're talking about. The 95% of the decisions are probably made at the GM and head coach level, but ultimately, the owner has the final say. That's usually that responsibility has been delegated to the general manager and the head coach. And the term general manager is literally defined differently program to program. It's not league to league. It's program to program. Sometimes general managers have nothing to do with managing anybody. All they're involved with is the scouting staff. They manage the scouting side. They're involved just with players and finding players and bringing players in. Even at the USHL level, many of the GMs there, that's all they focus on is finding the new recruits and bringing new recruits in. We know several of them personally that's what they do. Other GMs, they're in charge of the coaching staff. Maybe they're in charge of all the coaches. If there's an NA3 team or there's an NPHL team, they're in charge of all that. And they, as a general manager, they're kind of structuring the heartbeat of how the whole organization works. So that term gets used in different ways. Other general managers are the same thing as the president of the organization, where sometimes that takes on even a business function, where all hockey operations, front office and back office, the general manager takes on. So that term, you got to be careful with that, defining that. But where the buck usually stops is with your head coach. Mike, you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think people just need to realize too. We kind of touched on it on the last episode, and you mentioned it earlier, where you said it really starts becoming more of a business. But the two biggest things a head coach has to do is win and advances players to college. So those two things have to happen for them. So if there's a player that they can acquire that is going to help them do both of those things, they're going to make it every time. And that might bump and squeeze a guy off the current roster because either that player doesn't help them win now, or they're a player that they don't think they can advance to college for whatever reason. It could be grades, could be ability, it could be a lot of different things. And that's where it's different than midget hockey, because midget, once the team is picked, that's it. For better or worse, that's your team for the rest of the year until they make a change at the end of the year. Juniors is not like that at all.
So, Mike, we've got literally 8 minutes before our scouting meeting starts with our staff. So we got to jump off of this and jump onto another call. For those of you that stuck around and listened to us two idiots talk, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I hope that you picked up something and enjoyed a little bit of this. And make sure you go like and subscribe to our Facebook discussion group, Junior Hockey Advisor. Junior Hockey Live is available. But if you could, go to Junior Hockey Advisor's YouTube page. We're only a few bodies away from hitting that magical 1,000 mark there. We're growing that group too, just like we grew our discussion group, which just hit 10,000 last week. We are at 10,000 plus now on that, and I think we're rolling close to that's on the discussion group. On the page side, we're close to 10,000 to that side too. And you add all that stuff up, we got a really nice little group of people, and the Junior Hockey Advisor family is growing. So we appreciate all that, but we sure could use your help on continuing to grow. Take care, Mike. We'll see you in a few minutes.
Sounds good.
Lions hat off, put your Brahmas hat on, and we'll continue to go. Everybody, have a great night.
Take care, everyone.